I'm Eliana Torres, 27 graphic designer and apparently the non-blood niece. The baby shower was already in full swing when I stepped out of my car and stared at the pink and silver balloon arch curling over the front porch. Laughter bubbled from the open windows of the rented farmhouse-style venue. Cars lined the gravel driveway like well-behaved dominoes. Everyone else was already inside. I adjusted the box in my arms, my gift. A handmade scrapbook I'd spent 3 months compiling and tried to shake off the sticky feeling that clung to my skin. It wasn't the weather, it was the anticipation. When I reached the door, a woman in a crisp black shirt with a shower staff badge looked up from her guest list clipboard. Name, she asked, without looking up again. Eliana Torres. I said it softly, but clearly. Her brows scrunched. Last name again, Torres. Her finger moved down the list, then hovered. I don't see that on the family side. Are you with the bride's friends? No. I'm. I paused, feeling the words dry up. I'm her niece. The woman blinked, then leaned in slightly. Oh, are you sure you're not here for the other event? I almost laughed. Almost. No. I'm here for Maya's shower. I helped with the invitations. She didn't argue, just gave that tight-lipped smile people reserve for children who've wandered into adult spaces. She stepped aside eventually, but the sting had already sunk in. Inside, everything was pastel and pristine. Paper butterflies dangled from the ceiling. A custom cake towered in the center of the room with pink roses spiraling around sugar letters spelling out Maya and baby. I spotted my Aunt Lucinda in a sleek rose-colored dress, flanked by two of her daughters, who looked like copies of her at varying levels of confidence. She was laughing, full and loud, glass of mock champagne in hand. I walked over slowly, feeling eyes flick over me. Some turned away politely, others lingered. Lucinda spotted me just as I approached the gift table. Her voice carried like a siren across the sea of chatter. Oh, Eliana. I smiled. Hi, Tia. I brought something special for Maya. She nodded, but didn't look at the gift. Instead, she tilted her head and said with a chuckle, You always show up to these things like you're part of the core family. It's sweet. I froze, still holding the scrapbook. Sorry. She waved her hand casually. I mean, you're technically part of the family, but not really real family. You know, not by blood. There was a pause, not silence, but a subtle shift in the room's texture, like a fabric being torn beneath polite smiles. Maya, across the room, was opening a present. Someone laughed too loudly. I just stood there, gripping the scrapbook. I'm your sister's daughter, I said. That's real. Lucinda blinked. Well, half-sister? And you know, people throw that term family around so generously these days. Her voice was light, like she was saying something quirky. But it wasn't quirky. It was slicing. I looked down at my gift. My hands had started to shake. If you've ever felt like an outsider in your own family, I want you to know you're not alone. If someone has ever questioned your place, I see you. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And please, like and subscribe. Sometimes, it's in the smallest moments that the biggest truths finally come out. I turned to place the scrapbook on the table, when a deeper voice behind me cut through the air. Eliana Torres. I turned to see a tall man in a suit standing near the main entrance. I recognized him, Miguel, the lawyer from my grandfather's estate. Everyone's head turned. Yes, I answered, startled. He stepped forward and cleared his throat. I was told to deliver this to you publicly. He pulled a folded document from a sleek black envelope and handed it to me with care. As per your grandfather's final request, this is your certified genealogy file and heir record. He wanted you to have it in front of the family. Whispers crackled across the room like a slow-burning fuse. Lucinda's face drained of its rosy tone. I unfolded the document slowly. It was my family tree. Not printed from a website, not doodled in a notebook. This was official, meticulously documented. My mother's name, my birth certificate number, and the DNA confirmation from when Grandpa passed and had all of us tested quietly. My name had a golden star beside it, Miguel added. For clarity, Eliana is the only grandchild to carry his direct maternal surname after it was legally restored. That makes her the inheritor of the Torres family archive, and most importantly, his designated heir to the private vault. A gasp. I didn't move. Neither did anyone else. I just stood there, fingers still curled around the scrapbook, in the middle of a suddenly silent baby shower, with every eye turned towards me and every mouth finally shut. My hands were still trembling, though now it wasn't from humiliation. It was from something else, something I hadn't felt around them in years. Power. Or maybe it was clarity. Miguel gave a small nod and excused himself quietly, leaving behind a silence that hovered like mist in the middle of the bright, festive room. No one spoke. Not immediately. I looked up slowly, scanning the faces. Some were stiff with confusion. Others were frozen in manufactured smiles. Lucinda's mouth opened slightly, but no words came. And Maya, sweet, warm. Maya was the first to step forward. She stood, her baby bump leading the way, and reached out without hesitation. "You made a scrapbook?" she asked softly. For me, I nodded. "Can I open it with you?" That tiny, gentle sentence so normal broke the atmosphere like glass. I walked to her slowly and handed it over. Her hands touched mine for a second longer than needed, like an anchor in a room where everything was floating off the ground. Maya walked back to the couch where the gifts were being unwrapped and invited me to sit beside her. No one objected. She opened the scrapbook carefully, page by page. I'd chosen textured beige cardstock and pressed delicate dried flowers into each corner. Every page held a letter, a photograph, a tiny story. Not just of her pregnancy, but of her childhood, her milestones, her messy braces phase, the summer we went to the lake house and she almost drowned and I pulled her out coughing and laughing. I heard sniffles, real ones. Someone was crying. Lucinda sat down at the far end of the room. She hadn't spoken since Miguel left. "Did you make this all by hand?" Maya whispered. "Yeah," I said. "I started after the announcement. Just a few pages at first. But I couldn't stop. It's beautiful." Someone behind us clapped softly, then another. Eventually, the clapping turned into a few scattered cheers, and then it went quiet again. But this time, the air felt different. Not warm, but no longer sharp. Still, I didn't stay long after that. I slipped out through the side patio when the music started again, and the next round of games was announced. I'd been polite. I'd stayed. But I wasn't about to force myself into a family that needed to be convinced I belonged. I drove home in silence. No radio. No calls. That night, as I curled up on the couch with a mug of chamomile tea, I stared at the envelope Miguel had given me. I hadn't looked at all of it, just the front pages. Inside was more than just a family tree. There were letters, scans of handwritten notes from my grandfather. He'd kept journals, apparently neatly organized. In one, he'd written, "Eliana is the one who carries the quiet flame." She reminds me of my own mother, distant from the noise, but clear. I see her, even if others don't. My fingers trembled again, but this time, it wasn't weakness. It was release. 2 days passed. I didn't expect anything from the family. They'd seen me. They'd been forced to. But recognition given under pressure doesn't hold. Then, On the third day, I got a text from my cousin Mateo. Hey, that thing at the shower was intense. I didn't know you were Grandpa's heir, or that he kept all those records. Kinda wild. Can we talk? Mateo had always been the quiet one, stayed out of drama, always polite. We hadn't talked much in the last few years. I replied, sure. Coffee. We met at a small cafe near my apartment. I wore a soft gray sweater and kept my hair tied back. He was already there when I arrived, sipping something dark and unsweetened. Hey, he said when he saw me. Hi. He stood up and gave me an awkward side hug, then motioned for me to sit. Lucinda's not taking it well. He said once we both had our drinks. She's spinning. Says Grandpa was manipulated. That it's all some weird stunt. I raised my eyebrows but said nothing. But, he continued, some of us read the documents. And the letters. They're real. Like, really real. He sipped his coffee and looked at me. I didn't realize how much you'd done for Maya. All those memories. And how much Grandpa trusted you. I nodded slowly. I didn't do it to prove anything. I just thought she'd want to remember. Mateo leaned forward. You've always been kind of invisible at these things. I guess we just never noticed. I didn't answer. Not out of bitterness, but because the truth didn't need my voice anymore. It was already in the air. She asked about you. By the way, Maya said you left early. Yeah, it felt like the right time. He nodded. Well, she wants to see you again. Maybe even go through more of Grandpa's archives. She said it felt like a connection to something real. I smiled. I'd like that. Later that week, I got another message. This time from Maya. Do you have time this weekend? I'd love to go through the old letters with you. Also, I'm sorry about what Aunt Lucinda said. It wasn't okay. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Yes, I'll bring cookies. That Saturday, I went to Maya's house. She had a small space set up with blankets, candles, and a stack of boxes labeled family. We went through them slowly. She cried when we found a letter her dad wrote before he passed. We laughed at an old Polaroid where Maya had marker all over her face, and I was grinning behind her with a fistful of crayons. There was something healing in that room. Around dinner time, we heard a knock at the door. Maya answered. I stayed seated. I heard a pause, then a soft voice. Eliana Lucinda stepped into the room like she was entering a church. Cautious, small, no makeup. I didn't expect you. I said. I know. She replied. Maya told me you were here. And I thought I should come. If you'll let me? Maya looked at me, then stepped out of the room. Lucinda sat down, slowly, across from me. You look like your mother, she said quietly. She raised me. I answered. Alone. Lucinda nodded. I wasn't kind to her. Or to you. I was angry when your father left and she stayed close to the family. I never understood how she could smile through it all. Silence. Then she looked at me. Not past me, not through me. At me. I was wrong. About what makes someone family. I didn't cry, but I felt something uncoil inside my chest. We didn't hug. We didn't reconcile in some grand way. But she stayed. She sat. And sometimes, that's enough. The next time I saw Lucinda, it wasn't planned. I was walking through the aisles of Mercado del Sol, the local Hispanic grocery store on 8th, trying to decide between two different brands of guava paste. She appeared by the produce stand, holding a bunch of cilantro in one hand and scanning the limes like she was waiting for them to confess something. Our eyes met. She hesitated, then gave a slow nod. Eliana. I nodded back. Hi. I didn't expect to see you here. I live nearby. She looked down at her cart. It was mostly empty, just some herbs, a bottle of sparkling cider, and what looked like a birthday card. "I'm cooking something for Maya," she said after a moment, trying to get back into the habit. I gave her a polite smile and returned to my guava paste dilemma. She stepped closer. "How's the archive going?" I shrugged, still sorting through the letters. "There's a lot." "I bet." I finally picked one of the jars and dropped it into my basket. Some of them are in Spanish. Old Spanish. From when our great-grandparents lived in San Luis. Her eyes softened. "We never learned any of that. Papa tried once, but then he got tired. I've been translating it." Slowly. She tilted her head. "Can I see them sometime?" I looked at her for a long beat. Maybe. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a rejection. Just a possibility. That was all I had to give. We parted ways after a short, civil conversation about plantains and the rising price of vanilla extract. At the register, I saw her glance back once. Just once. Then she was gone. Maya and I became regulars at the little cafe on Thursday evenings. We'd bring a few folders from the archive and spread them across our favorite table by the window. The staff got used to us, especially the tall barista with wire-rimmed glasses who started slipping us extra cinnamon sticks with our drinks. One night, as rain tapped softly on the glass, Maya unsealed an envelope labeled Torres, 1973. Inside was a photograph, black and white, faded. 4 people: my grandfather, his brother, their mother, and a teenage girl standing slightly apart from the others. My mother. "Was she always this quiet?" Maya asked. I nodded. She wasn't shy, just grounded, like she didn't need noise to be real. "She looks strong." She was... Maya traced the edge of the photo. "I wish I'd known her better." "She loved you," I said. "She called you her little sparrow." Maya smiled faintly. "Lucinda said that once. I thought she made it up." I didn't reply. We went back to the documents. That night, I returned home and opened one of the storage boxes Miguel had delivered later. It wasn't labeled like the others. Just had my name Eliana written in slanted script on a piece of masking tape. Inside were 5 notebooks, each one filled with my grandfather's handwriting. He'd kept detailed records not just of the family history, but of conversations, thoughts, even things we'd said as children. In one entry from 2004, I read, "Eliana asked me today why Lucinda never lets her help decorate the altar. I told her that some people don't see what's right in front of them because they're looking through old hurts." She didn't understand. She just nodded and placed a marigold on the step anyway. I closed the book slowly. My mother used to say, "Family is not made of clean lines. It's stitched together through contradictions." Weeks passed. Spring came early. Lucinda reached out again, not with words, but with a gesture. A card arrived in the mail. No envelope, just the card itself. Hand-delivered. On the front was a painting of an old oak tree. Inside, her handwriting, "I'm hosting a dinner." Small. "Just the cousins and Maya. I would be honored if you'd come." I held the card for a long time. Then I placed it on the mantel and let it sit there for 4 days. On the 5th, I texted Maya. "Will you be there?" She replied instantly, "Only if you are." So I went. The evening air was warm, and the garden lights in Lucinda's backyard glowed like tiny moons. She'd set up a long table under the orange tree, with mismatched chairs and real linen napkins. Mateo was there, and his brother Luis, and even Clara, who I hadn't seen since high school. Maya sat at the center of the table like a calm axis, radiating quiet warmth. When I arrived, Lucinda was setting out bowls of mole and rice. She looked up. "Eliana," she said simply. "Thank you for coming." I nodded. Dinner was simple. warm, filled with low conversation and bursts of shared laughter. At one point, Lucinda stood and lifted her glass. "I want to say something," she began. Everyone quieted. "I've made a lot of mistakes with this family," she said, "especially with Eliana. I let my own bitterness define how I saw people who didn't deserve it, and I want to change that. If you'll let me." She looked at me. I didn't respond with a speech, just a quiet, sincere, "Thank you." And that was enough. The night went on with stories and memories. And when I left, Lucinda hugged me. Not tightly, not theatrically, just enough. Later, back at home, I sat in front of the last document in the archive. It was a family tree, the full one, cleaned up, scanned, reprinted on thick paper. At the very top was my great-great-grandmother, and down at the bottom, circled in gold ink, was me. No asterisk, no footnote, no parentheses. Just Eliana Torres, daughter of Marisol, granddaughter of Alonso, heir of the Torres line. I leaned back, the document resting on my knees, and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding since the shower. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. Not to Lucinda, not to the cousins, not even to Maya, because the truth had always been in my hands. And finally, they saw it too. 2 months passed, and I didn't speak much about the dinner to anyone else outside the family, not because I was hiding it, but because something about it felt like it needed to stay small and intact, like a delicate heirloom you don't rush to display. Lucinda hadn't called again, but she started doing quiet things that spoke louder than words ever had. A card on my birthday, just a single sunflower painted on the front. A small Tupperware of tamales delivered to Maya's house with a note, "For you and Eliana, if you're still meeting tonight." And one evening, after Maya and I had finished going through the last of the Spanish letters, I noticed Lucinda had slipped a tiny, laminated copy of our family crest into the folder. No signature, no explanation, just there, between pages, like a whisper. It still made me pause, though. I hadn't told her I forgave her. I wasn't even sure I had. What does forgiveness look like when you've spent your whole life building armor around a truth that nobody believed one Sunday morning? I sat on my front porch with a cup of black tea and the smell of my neighbor's jasmine wafting through the fence. I opened my laptop to an email I hadn't expected. Subject: Family Tree Submission Request from National Genealogical Archive. Dear Ms. Eliana Torres, we are pleased to inform you that your family documentation has been reviewed and qualifies for formal entry into the Latin American Heritage Preservation Project. It listed the names, the dates, the sources. They had validated it all. I blinked at the screen, then reread it twice. They wanted to publish a portion of our tree, and they wanted me to submit a personal statement about its preservation. They'd even asked if I would consider giving a short interview on their cultural heritage podcast. I leaned back in my chair. The birds chirped on cue, like background music in a documentary. A part of me was proud. Another part whispered, "Should you tell them? The family." But before I could decide, my phone buzzed. "Maya, are you free for lunch today?" Her message read. I replied yes. She said to meet her at Café Luce. When I arrived, she was already there sitting outside beneath the striped umbrella, hair pulled into a soft braid and one hand resting protectively over her belly. She was so close to her due date now. As I approached, she stood slowly. Guess what she said? "It's happening next week." "You're inducing." She nodded. "Doctor said it's time." She sat again and took a slow sip from her glass of iced mint water. "I wanted to see you today because, well, 2 things." I raised an eyebrow. "First," she said, pulling a thin folder from her bag, "I printed something for you." From the baby. I opened the folder. Inside was a birth dedication certificate, the kind hospitals let you customize. Under dedication name, she had typed Eliana Torres Honorary Tia, Keeper of Stories. I stared at the words for a long moment, a lump forming at the back of my throat. It's not official, she said, but it's official to me. I laughed gently. That's all that matters. She reached over and touched my hand. I wanted to ask you something else. Too. I was thinking about middle names. I tilted my head. Maya. You don't. I want to name her Alma. She interrupted softly. After your mom. I remember how she used to braid my hair before school when my mom was too busy yelling about shoes, and how she used to draw those tiny birds on the corners of my notebooks. My throat tightened. You remember that I remember everything. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Maya smiled and let the silence sit with us. It wasn't awkward. It was full. When I finally found my voice again, I told her about the email. Her eyes widened. Eliana, that's huge. You have to do it. I don't know. It feels big. Like suddenly this story doesn't belong just to us anymore. She looked out toward the street for a moment, then turned back to me. Maybe it never did. Maybe it belongs to everyone who's ever felt erased, then found their name again in someone else's handwriting. I didn't expect her to say that. It stayed with me for days. The interview was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. I sat at my dining table, laptop open, microphone ready, the document beside me. The host, a warm-voiced woman named Clara Ramos, welcomed me gently and asked me to tell the story, not just the facts, but the feeling of what it meant to reclaim something everyone else had overlooked. I told her about my grandfather, about the baby shower, about the scrapbook. I didn't name Lucinda. I didn't need to. When she asked me what I would say to someone out there who felt like they were on the margins of their own family, I took a breath. I'd say, "You're real," even if someone refuses to look at you, even if they rewrite the seating chart, even if they cross your name off the list, you are still made of everything that came before you, and sometimes, being written out of their version just means you get to write your own. The silence on the other end was beautiful and respectful. When the interview ended, I closed my laptop and sat there, letting the sunlight hit the tips of my fingers where they rested on the table. It felt like something had closed, not a door, more like a loop. Maya gave birth the following week. A beautiful, soft-cheeked girl with dark eyes and a squinty little frown that looked, oddly, like my mother's when she concentrated. They named her Alma Lucia. I held her in the hospital room, her tiny fingers wrapping around the tip of mine, and felt like the whole weight of silence across generations had melted into her soft, rhythmic breaths. Lucinda was there, too. She stood at the doorway, watching me. "I wanted to thank you," she said quietly, "for not shutting us out." I looked up. "You didn't give me much reason to let you in?" "I know. But still." I nodded. "This is a start." She walked over and touched Alma's head gently. "She has her nose," she said. "Who's your mother's, you know, the way it crinkles when she dreams?" I looked down again, and she was right. Maya smiled from her bed, eyes tired but glowing. "Maybe you can tell her stories when she's old enough." "I will," I said. "I'll tell her everything." That night, I went home, took the family tree out one more time, and unfolded it on my living room floor. There, in the top right corner, I added one more name in soft pencil: Alma Lucia Rivera, daughter of Maya, great-granddaughter of Alma No Fanfare. No audience, just legacy, traced in quiet hands. By the time spring slipped fully into summer, the archive was done. Every folder, every letter, every scrap of newspaper had been scanned, cataloged, and stored in acid-free sleeves. I organized everything into digital files, labeled with careful precision dates, names, bloodlines. Then, I backed it all up 3 times. One for me, one for Maya, and one, surprisingly, for Lucinda. She had asked, not demanded, asked, would you be willing to make a copy she'd said over the phone one evening, her voice slightly hesitant. Not for me, for the girls. So they can see where they come from, too. I told her I'd think about it. Then I stayed up that night, scanning, resizing, labeling until dawn. A week later, I mailed her a box. Inside was a printed version, each section separated by golden tabs. On the first page, I added a note, not a letter, just a sentence. We are all just pieces of someone else's story, trying to find our own place in the margins. No signature. I wanted the words to stand alone. The family tree, both literal and metaphorical, started blooming in odd places. Mateo began asking questions. Every few days. A new message. Hey, did you ever find out who Abuela Rosa's sister married? What year did the store burn down again? Was that land in Zacatecas ever passed down? It turned out he'd taken an interest in genealogy and had started building an interactive website. I helped him, quietly, from behind the scenes. Sometimes we'd call late at night and compare theories like we were detectives. There was something almost childish about it, us, grown adults, whispering into our phones about lost birth records and border crossings like it was a secret game. And slowly, the conversations turned from data points into something warmer. Do you ever think about how many people were never counted? He asked one night. All the time. I said, that's why we're doing this. He paused. Then, I'm glad you never walked away from us. You could have. You had every right. I didn't respond right away. I didn't need to. Some acknowledgments don't require applause, just breath. One Sunday, I got a call from Clara Ramos, the woman who'd interviewed me for the archive. Eliana, she said, would you be open to speaking at the Heritage Summit this fall? It's just a short keynote. 10 minutes. I laughed softly. I'm not a speaker. Exactly. That's why we want you. You're a storyteller. And you lived it. I told her I'd consider it. Then I hung up and stared at my reflection in the hallway mirror for a long time. Could I do it? Stand in front of strangers and tell them what it felt like to be erased and then rewritten into your own family narrative I didn't know. But I wanted to try. The night before the summit, I stood in front of my closet trying to decide between 2 outfits. Both professional, both quiet. One in navy, the other in muted maroon. Eventually, I picked the maroon. My mother had once worn something similar to my graduation, deep, bold, and utterly her. I packed my notes, though I barely looked at them, and before bed, I opened a small wooden box on my nightstand. Inside was the old laminated family crest Lucinda had slipped between the folders weeks ago. I held it for a moment, then tucked it into my bag. The Heritage Summit was held in an old auditorium downtown, the kind with creaky wooden seats and dust particles that glowed in morning light like golden ghosts. Clara met me backstage and hugged me. You ready? She asked. Not even slightly. She laughed. Good. That means you're not pretending? I stepped out when my name was called. The stage lights too bright to see the crowd clearly, but I could hear them. Quiet, attentive, waiting. I took a breath. My name is Eliana Torres. I began. And for most of my life, I was part of a family who loved to forget me. There was a pause, a beat of silence that gave the words room. I wasn't erased in a dramatic way. No one tore up my picture. No one screamed. They just rearranged the chairs, left me off the list, called me sweet, but not real. A few heads nodded in the front row. And then one day, someone handed me a document, a record, a truth that proved I belonged, that I'd always belonged. And I had to decide what to do with that proof, whether to use it as a weapon or as a bridge. I told them about Maya, the baby shower, the scrapbook. I didn't cry, but I saw someone else wipe their eyes. I rebuilt our family archive not because I wanted revenge, I said, but because I wanted to hear their voices again, the ones who were too quiet to be remembered, the ones who weren't loud enough to carve themselves into the memory of the loudest. At the end, the room stood, not all at once, just gradually, like a wave finding its rhythm. Clara hugged me again backstage. "You did it," she whispered. I smiled. They listened. A few weeks after the summit, Lucinda invited me to her house for tea. It was early evening. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and chamomile. Her movements were slower these days, but gentler, too. "I heard about the speech," she said, setting down 2 mugs. "Matteo showed me the video." I nodded. "I was nervous. You didn't look it." She sat across from me, her hands curled around her cup like it was something sacred. "I wanted to say something," she continued, "about your mother." I looked up. I hated her for being able to leave, for not begging to be included, for not needing anyone's approval. And I took it out on you. Every time you smiled, I saw her. Every time you stayed silent, I heard her voice. Her eyes were watery, but she didn't cry. I was wrong, Eliana, and I'm sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know I'm trying. I sat with that for a long time. Then I said, I think she forgave you a long time ago, even if you didn't ask." Lucinda looked down, nodding slowly. She probably did. She was like that. We sipped in silence, and then, very quietly, she said, "I'm glad you stayed." I didn't reply. I just reached across the table and rested my hand over hers. Later that night, I walked home through the dusk. The sky was lavender and rose-colored, the air soft and still. At home, I opened the digital archive on my computer and scrolled through the names. There were so many now, so many voices stitched back into time. And somewhere in the middle of it, among the births and deaths and marriages and departures, there was a name that had once been forgotten. Mine. No longer at the edge, no longer written in pencil. Centered, preserved, belonging. The day Maya brought Alma to my apartment for the first time, everything smelled like vanilla and eucalyptus. I'd cleaned twice, lit a soft scented candle, and even laid out a folded blanket that used to belong to my mother, one of those faded cotton throws with hummingbirds embroidered into the corners. Maya stood in the doorway, cradling Alma in her arms, wearing a light denim jacket over a flowing dress. The baby was wrapped in a pale yellow swaddle, cheeks warm and full, lips twitching in a half-sleep expression. "She's been fussy," Maya whispered, "but I think she just needed air." "Come in," I said, stepping aside. As they entered, Alma stirred and opened her eyes. Brown, deep, and unreadable. I felt something in my chest flutter. Maya lowered herself carefully onto the couch and exhaled. "I forgot how exhausting it is just to leave the house. You look strong." I look like I've been emotionally waterboarded by a 7-pound goddess with lungs like a trumpet. I laughed and offered her a glass of cucumber water. She took it and gave me a grateful glance. Alma made a soft grunting sound. "May I hold her?" I asked. Maya nodded without hesitation and passed her into my arms. She was lighter than I expected, yet heavy with some invisible density like history, like future. She blinked slowly at me, her mouth parting in the quiet way newborns do when the world is too large to understand. She looks like you, I murmured. She has your calm? Maya replied. Even the nurse said it. We sat there a while, listening to the faint hum of traffic outside, the occasional bird, the slow swirl of ceiling fan blades. Alma didn't cry. She studied my face with vague curiosity, her tiny fingers curling in the air as if grasping for something forgotten. Have you told her any stories yet? I asked softly. Not yet. I don't know where to start. I smiled. Start with the quiet ones, the ones no one thinks matter. Maya leaned her head on the couch armrest and closed her eyes. You want to tell her the first I looked down at the small life resting in my arms. Of course. So I began. Once there was a little girl named Alma who came from a long line of women who survived things nobody wrote down. They didn't wear crowns or ride horses. They didn't win wars. But they held families together when no one noticed. They remembered names, even when others forgot. They sang songs that didn't have recordings. They made food that tasted like protection. And they held babies like you with hands that carried hundreds of years inside them. Alma blinked. Her breathing slowed. They weren't loud, but they were real. They were never the center of the photo, but they were always the reason someone smiled in it. By the time I finished, her eyes had closed again. She slept with that deep, uninterrupted stillness that only infants and the very old possess. Maya reached over and touched my wrist. That's perfect, she whispered. A few weeks later, I got a message from Mateo. We're thinking of organizing a family history night. Show everyone the tree, some of the letters, maybe food, slides. You in? I hesitated. Part of me still recoiled at the idea of standing in front of everyone. The old memories, the way I'd been dismissed, minimized, erased, still had sharp corners. But another part of me, a newer part, imagined what it could feel like to be seen without needing to prove anything. I texted back, I'll help, quietly. He replied, we need your voice. L, not just your help. Family History Night was held in the community center down the street from our abuela's old house. The chairs were folding metal ones. The projector was glitchy. The air conditioner wheezed. But the room was full. Lucinda brought tamales and arroz con leche. Clara came with her husband and two of their kids. Maya arrived a little late, Alma strapped to her chest, fast asleep. Mateo stood up first and gave a brief welcome, then started clicking through slides. He showed photos from the early 1900s, handwritten marriage records, maps of where our ancestors had traveled. He even cracked a few gentle jokes. The family laughed, murmured, nodded. Then he handed me the remote. I stood slowly. A few faces stiffened, some surprised, some unreadable, but no one objected. I cleared my throat. I wasn't always in the room, I said, but I always saw the room. I remembered where the cracks were in the wall, even when I wasn't invited to patch them. And when Grandpa left us his papers, I started collecting, quietly, piece by piece, not to rewrite anything, just to remember it right. I clicked the remote. A photograph of my mother appeared. She was laughing, holding a cup of tea, her hair pulled back with a clip shaped like a bird. This is Alma, I said. My mother. She wasn't loud, but she was the root of a lot more than anyone realized. I told a short story about her, how she used to teach me the names of trees by their bark, how she would press leaves into books and say, let it sleep here a while. Someone in the back sniffled. I clicked again. A photo of my grandfather, then a letter, then the tree unfolding, name by name, including everyone, even the ones who had been forgotten. I didn't speak for long, just enough. When I finished, the room clapped, not loudly, but long and warm. Lucinda stood and approached me afterward. She held a plate of pan dulce and offered it like it was an offering. "You did good," she said. "I told the truth." I answered, "That's what I meant." After everyone left, I stayed behind to help Mateo fold the chairs. He glanced at me over a stack of them. "You're the reason this happened." I shook my head. "No, just the reason it didn't stay buried." He leaned the last chair against the wall. "Same thing. Really. We turned off the lights. Locked up." Later that night, I returned home and sat by the window. The city was quiet. Summer heat still clung to the windowsills. I pulled the family tree file up on my laptop again, scrolling through it like a memory palace. Every name had weight now. Not just facts, but stories. Personal. Earned. And mine was there. No longer needing validation, no longer seeking space. Just present. Just part of it. The story of how I became real family didn't end with a scream or a slammed door. It ended with names spoken aloud, with food passed hand to hand, with a baby named Alma sleeping peacefully in the arms of someone who once stood outside the circle, waiting to be let in. And now, I didn't wait anymore. I built my own seat, and they came to sit beside me. It was autumn by the time I found the final letter. I wasn't looking for it. I had thought the archive was complete. Everything filed, labeled, wrapped in careful protection. But there it was, tucked into the back flap of an old photo album, hidden behind a loose page that had been stuck for who knows how long. I found it on a quiet Sunday, during a rare rainstorm that cast soft ripples on the windows and made the apartment smell like warm paper and earth. The envelope was pale blue. My name was written on it in my grandfather's handwriting. Eliana. Nothing else. My breath caught. I turned it over, then back again, holding it in both hands as if it might disintegrate from warmth. It had never been opened. It wasn't old enough to be yellowed, but it carried that weight emotional sediment pressed into paper. I sat on the couch, legs crossed under me, and opened it. Inside a single page. Eliana, you're going to find this too late. That's how I meant it. Some things are only understood after you've lived through them. I saw what happened between you and Lucinda, and I stayed silent. Maybe I shouldn't have. But I knew silence would force you to decide who you are without anyone rescuing you. I never wanted you to be a victim. I wanted you to become something no one could question. And you did. I knew you'd carry the story. I saw it when you were 6, cutting out old family photos and making your own tree with colored string. You were never trying to prove anything. You were trying to connect. That's why you're the one who gets everything. Not because of blood, because of choice. If the others come around, accept them, but don't depend on it. The truth has to live even if no one claps for it. Love. Abuelo. I read it twice, then a third time, and then I folded it and placed it gently inside the wooden keepsake box on my shelf. I didn't cry. There was something about the way he'd written it, plain, clear, unsentimental, that left no need for tears. He saw me, and he let me see myself. A few days later, I was walking through the city park with Maya and Alma. The trees had begun their slow transformation, orange and gold creeping into the green like ink in water. Alma was bundled up in a tiny fleece coat, her face peeking out like a sunrise. Maya held a paper coffee cup in both hands. "So, what happens now?" she asked. I looked at her. "What do you mean with the archive? With the tree? With everything you've done? Is it finished?" I thought about that for a moment. Finished? No, but it's solid now. I don't need to fix it anymore. She smiled. That's a big shift. I used to want everyone to admit I was part of it. Now I just want to keep it safe, whether they look or not. Maya stopped and adjusted Alma's blanket. "You know, when I was little, I used to think family was something you were either born into or not, like a fixed table with only so many chairs. And now I asked, now I think it's a table we're always building. And the ones who bring tools get to stay. I laughed gently. Then I guess I brought a toolbox and a blueprint. She nodded. You rebuilt the foundation. We walked on in silence, the wind brushing past us like a careful reminder that things always move, even if you don't see it. The next week, I got a formal letter in the mail. It was from the city's Historical Preservation Office. They had heard about my work from the Heritage Summit and wanted to include the Torres Archive in an exhibit on generational memory. They were planning a rotating display in the city museum called Lines of the Past. They asked if I would curate the Torres section myself. I stared at the letter in disbelief. Then I laughed sharp, disbelieving, a little stunned. Not long ago, I'd stood on a doorstep being told I wasn't real family. Now, my family's story was going to be behind glass, under lighting, in a room where strangers would walk by and read our names, our recipes, our photographs, our letters. I called Mateo. You serious, he said, barely hiding his excitement. Very. You're going to need help. A lot of help. I'm counting on it. I'll call Clara and Luis. They'll flip. The planning took months. We had to choose which items to display, what stories would fit into the space, what objects told the most about who we were without needing to explain every wound. The curators were gentle, respectful. They let me choose. They treated me like a professional, not a placeholder. I picked 7 pieces, a copy of the hand-drawn family tree with golden stars beside names that had been lost and later recovered, my mother's hummingbird blanket, a photograph of Maya and Alma with the caption, Inheritance, Reborn, a black and white photo of my grandfather and his brothers, the scrapbook I had made for the baby shower, a letter from Lucinda to her daughters, handwritten, apologizing and explaining, and finally, the blue envelope with my name on it, still sealed. I scanned the letter but kept the original private. Each object would be displayed with a quote, sometimes from a family member, sometimes from the letters, sometimes just from memory, under the scrapbook. I chose the words, "Proof doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes wrapped in paper and patience." The exhibit opened in early December. It was snowing lightly. The city museum stood like a sleeping cathedral, quiet and warm inside. The Torres section had its own alcove, small, intimate, enough room for 15 people to linger without bumping shoulders. I stood in the corner with Maya, Alma on her hip, watching strangers lean in to read our history. Lucinda came too. She wore a soft gray scarf and a brooch I recognized from her wedding photo. She didn't cry, but she stood before the family tree for a long time, her eyes moving from name to name, landing finally on mine. I watched her take a breath, then step back. She didn't speak to me right away. She just walked over and placed her hand briefly on my shoulder. Then she turned and joined Mateo by the glass display of our grandfather's letter. That small gesture, unremarkable to most, carried more weight than any apology she could have rehearsed. Maya looked at me. Do you feel seen now? I considered the question carefully. No, I said. Not seen. I feel remembered. She smiled. That's better. Later that evening, as the museum emptied and the lights dimmed, I lingered near the tree. One of the curators approached me, a soft-spoken woman with silver hair and clear eyes. People don't usually choose the quiet stories, she said. I turned to her. Maybe they should. She nodded. They last longer. I looked one last time at the photograph of my mother, then at the quote beneath it. Real doesn't require permission. It only requires memory. Then I stepped outside, into the snowfall, and walked home through a world that finally carried my name. The snow kept falling, soft and endless, like dust from a story too big to end all at once. I walked home slowly that night, bundled in my long coat, the museum brochure still folded in my pocket. Streetlights shimmered over icy sidewalks. Cars passed with a hush. I watched my own breath rise in quiet clouds and wondered how long it would take for something like this to feel normal, for my name to be in people's mouths without it needing to be defended first. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights right away. I stood in the living room, letting the city's orange glow spill through the window, and just listened. No sounds but the radiator ticking and the occasional crack from the old wooden floorboards. The apartment had started to feel like a person, like a space that had absorbed everything I'd carried and learned how to hold me in return. I made tea, rooibos with almond milk and a touch of honey. It tasted warm and strange, like something from childhood but changed just enough by adulthood to make it its own thing. I wrapped myself in a blanket and sat by the window. From my third-floor view, I could see the church across the street with its flickering nativity scene already up. The little plastic baby Jesus cradled under one wing of a plastic angel with a chipped trumpet. Something about that made me smile. Nothing perfect, yet still sacred. My phone buzzed gently on the windowsill. A text from Clara Ramos. Saw the exhibit today. Brought my mother. She cried at the scrapbook. Said she never made one. Said she wished she had. I stared at it, thumb hovering, then typed back. Maybe you can still make one. Memory isn't linear. It's what we choose to carry. A moment passed. You always know how to say the things that feel like truth hiding under the noise, she replied. And then, thank you, Eliana. Really. I turned off my phone and held the mug close to my chest. The steam rose up and brushed against my chin like a soft hand. I had been many things in this family: invisible, inconvenient, almost but not quite. Now, I was something else. Not a title, not a category, just undeniable. Christmas came quietly. No big party, no dramatic announcements, just a small dinner at Lucinda's house, with Mateo bringing empanadas and Maya baking a tres leches cake that collapsed slightly in the middle but still tasted like love. Lucinda didn't decorate as extravagantly as usual. Just one tree, modest and earthy, with white lights and a few old ornaments from our grandmother's collection. She lit a candle near the photo of our grandfather and set out his favorite brand of whiskey untouched on a small tray beside it. When I arrived, Lucinda opened the door herself. She looked older, somehow more human. She was wearing a burgundy shawl and silver earrings I hadn't seen in years. Eliana, she said, like the name had finally settled into her mouth properly. Hi, I replied. The sidewalk's icy. Be careful when you come out later. She smiled. Thank you. Inside. The warmth hit immediately: oven heat, cinnamon, family noise. Clara and Luis were playing a quiet card game at the dining table. Maya was bouncing Alma, who now had 2 tiny teeth and a squeal that could crack glass. Lucinda gestured toward the kitchen. I set something aside for you. On the counter was a box wrapped in deep green paper with a white silk ribbon. I hesitated, then picked it up. Should I open it now? I asked. She nodded. Inside, I found a photo frame, but it wasn't empty. Behind the glass was a picture I'd never seen before: my mother, maybe 25, standing beside Lucinda in the garden of their childhood home. They were both laughing, my mother holding a watering can and Lucinda holding a pot of marigolds. It was real. Not posed, not planned. Just real. I found it last month, Lucinda said quietly. I had forgotten she ever looked at me like that. I stared at the photo. The sunlight caught in their hair, the worn wooden fence in the background, the tilt of their heads toward each other. Sisters. Whole. Before the distance. Thank you, I said. She loved you. Lucinda said. She would have been proud of what you've done. I met her eyes. I think she'd be glad we're here. Together. Even if it took a while. Lucinda blinked, and something in her face shifted less guarded, more vulnerable. Stay late if you want, she said. You don't have to leave early this time. I smiled. I'll help with dishes. That night, after Alma was asleep in her carrier and the cake had been picked apart down to the soggy corners, we all sat around the living room trading memories. Mateo told the story of the time he accidentally locked himself in the tool shed for 4 hours and tried to dig his way out with a spoon. Clara recounted the summer Abuela dyed her hair blue by accident while trying to cover the gray. Then, quietly, Maya looked at me and said, "Tell them the one about the book." "What book?" Luis asked. "The one you made when you were little," she said. "The fake family tree." I laughed. "You remember that?" "Of course I do." So I told them about how I'd drawn everyone's names in crayon, how I made up cousins when I didn't feel included, how I added fictional uncles with castles and talking parrots just to make the branches feel full, how I'd glued leaves from the front yard onto the paper so it would smell like something alive. Lucinda laughed, truly laughed, and said, "That sounds like something Alma would do someday." Maya smiled and leaned her head on the couch cushion. "Alma's going to know who she is, and who she comes from, because of Eliana." The room fell quiet, but not awkward, just full again. After I got home, I placed the framed photo of my mother and Lucinda on the mantel beside my grandfather's journal. I sat on the couch, watching the glow from the Christmas lights, and opened my laptop. There, in the corner of the desktop, was a folder I hadn't touched in weeks. Torah's archive. I clicked it open. All the files were still there, labeled, protected, alive, but instead of adding to it, I did something else. I created a new folder, Alma's Stories, and inside it, I opened a blank document. At the top, I typed, "How to begin a life you know you belong to." Then I started writing. Not history, not proof, not names for others to argue over. Just stories. Stories of women who braided hair in kitchens, of men who buried letters in the folds of old albums, of cousins who forgot each other and then remembered, of silence that turned into presence, of pain that became lineage, of me no longer asking to be let in, just sitting at the table I built, and waiting, patiently, for Alma to grow old enough to listen. Winter deepened, quiet and slow. Snow clung to rooftops like old grief, but inside my apartment, the light stayed warm. Alma was crawling now. Maya would send me videos every few days, Alma babbling in her own invented language, giggling at spoons, trying to pull herself up against the coffee table like a determined little storm. I watched each one more than once, sometimes twice. There was something mesmerizing about watching someone so new, so untouched by doubt, move through the world as if she belonged to it. One morning, I sat at my desk, eyes flicking over a spreadsheet for work, but my attention drifted. My cursor hovered above the file labeled Alma's Stories. I opened it again, reread what I had written weeks ago, and added another line. A family isn't a picture. It's a sentence, passed from mouth to mouth, until someone writes it down. That day, I didn't work. I wrote. Not reports, not history, not analysis. I wrote little fictions, tiny legends based on truth stories where Alma's great-great-grandmother had magical aprons that could calm storms, where her grandfather could speak to trees, where Lucinda and my mother, as girls, rode imaginary horses across tiled rooftops and whispered secrets into glass bottles. And somewhere in the middle of writing them, I stopped noticing the bruises from the past. The need to explain myself dissolved. I was simply documenting the marrow of our lives, the quiet bones that no one else had thought to name. That night, I printed out one of the stories, folded it neatly, and slid it into a pale yellow envelope. On the front, I wrote, "For Alma, to be opened when you feel like you don't make sense to anyone." Then I tucked it inside the first drawer of my bookshelf. The invitation came by email. Subject line: guest lecture request. Cultural Memory and Personal Archive. It was from a professor at a local college who had attended the museum exhibit and was now teaching a seminar on identity and preservation. She asked if I would speak to her students. Not formally, just a conversation, an open circle. I hesitated. Then I said yes. When I arrived, the room was brighter than expected. No podium, just chairs arranged in a wide arc and a whiteboard with my name scrawled in the corner. About 20 students, some with notebooks, some with their arms folded, all watching. The professor greeted me warmly and gave me no script, just a single question. How did you decide your story was worth preserving? I sat down. It wasn't a decision, I said after a long moment. It was a survival instinct. When people ignore your name long enough, you start writing it on everything just to see it stay somewhere. A few heads nodded. I didn't grow up knowing I'd do this. I grew up quietly, always listening. And when people say you're not really family, or that your part of the story isn't essential, you start to shrink. Unless you find something that holds the shape of who you are. I reached into my bag and pulled out a copy of the family tree, the full version, unfolded it gently on the table. This held me. I didn't talk for long. Just enough. When it ended, a student approached me, a young woman with tightly coiled hair and a calm intensity in her eyes. "My grandmother's family doesn't speak to us," she said. "They pretended we didn't exist after my mom married my dad. I always thought I had no roots." I nodded slowly. "You do. They may not be where you expected, but they're there, waiting to be traced." She smiled, then paused. "Can I ask, did they ever really apologize? Your family I considered, not all of them," I said, "and not all at once. Some just showed up, kept showing up. That counts too." She nodded again and walked away. Back at home, I added a new folder to the archive others, a space for people like that student, like Clara, like me. People who carried erasures in their mouths like stones but still tried to speak. I started gathering resources, created a simple website, uploaded templates, scanning guides, story prompts. I didn't expect anyone to find it, but I made it anyway. Within a week, I got 3 emails, one from a boy in El Paso, another from a woman in Toronto, a third from someone who didn't sign their name, just wrote I found a letter in my grandmother's coat. I think it changes everything. And suddenly, what I had done wasn't just mine anymore. It was a pattern, a thread, memory braided across cities and screens. Lucinda called one evening. No occasion, just a quiet ring after dinner. "I was going through my closet," she said, "and I found one of your mother's old notebooks." My breath caught. "Did you read it?" I asked. "A few pages? Most of it's drawings, little phrases." I thought, maybe you'd want it. I did. She dropped it off the next day, in a manila folder. No ceremony. She didn't stay long, but she stood in the doorway a little longer than usual before saying goodbye. That night, I opened it. The pages were filled with tiny pencil sketches, flowers, birds, faces half finished, and phrases in soft, cursive Spanish hey cosas, que no se dicen porque el silencio las cuida. Some things are not said because silence protects them. Mi hija ve sin preguntar. Esa es su manera de amar. My daughter sees without asking. That is her way of loving. I closed the notebook with trembling fingers. I had spent so long trying to prove I belonged, but she had known it all along, quietly, without asking, without needing to be told. Maya invited me over one weekend. The weather had warmed slightly, that liminal space between winter's bite and spring's first breath. She had new photos of Alma to show me prints this time, not just digital. We spread them across the table like playing cards. Alma in a pink beanie, Alma tugging at Maya's earrings, Alma asleep with one hand pressed to her forehead like a poet in despair. I've been thinking, Maya said, sliding a photo toward me. When she's older, I want her to know who wrote her story before she could read it. You'll tell her? I will, but I want her to hear it from you too. I blinked. Me you, she said, smiling. You're the first voice she'll trust who isn't mine. I looked down at the photo. Alma's mouth was open mid-laugh, eyes half shut in joy. You sure? Maya nodded. No one else knows how to stitch truth into quiet the way you do. I didn't answer right away. I just reached for my bag, pulled out a printed page from Alma's stories, and slid it across the table. She read it silently, then wiped her eyes. That night, I walked home through light rain, the kind that's barely there but still changes the air. The city was shimmering, slick with reflection. When I reached my apartment, I opened the door and paused. The lights were soft, the room was quiet, and everything inside felt like it belonged. I hung up my coat, sat at my desk, and wrote one final line for the night. You are not real because they recognize you. You are real because you remember. Then I saved it, closed the laptop, and let the silence finish the sentence. The first time Alma said my name, I wasn't even there. It was Maya who told me, sent me a voice note one sleepy afternoon in March. The kind of day when the air feels like it's holding its breath between seasons. I was working at my dining table, sorting through client design files, when my phone buzzed. Her voice came through, giddy and breathless. You're not going to believe it. She said your name. Yana. Not perfect, but she meant you. She pointed at your photo on the fridge. Then she kissed it. You're her first word that isn't mama. I pressed play again. And again. Not perfect, she'd said. But what is? I sat back in my chair. The file I had been working on still open, the cursor blinking, waiting for a name to be typed. She had said mine first, not the ones who had doubted, not the ones who had drawn circles around themselves and called them blood. She said mine. I closed the laptop and just sat. There's a silence that comes not from absence, but from arrival. Like when the last puzzle piece clicks in. That's what it felt like. That night, I printed the photo from Maya's fridge, the one Alma had pointed at. It was from the museum opening, me holding Alma while Maya adjusted her coat. I hadn't noticed it before. Someone must have taken it when we weren't looking. I framed it, hung it beside the window, where the evening light touched the wall like a benediction. A few weeks later, Maya invited me to Alma's first birthday party. It was small, just close family, a few friends, nothing elaborate. But the moment I stepped into the house, I knew something had changed. Lucinda was there, helping arrange cupcakes on a tiered tray. Mateo was inflating balloons. Clara was stringing paper garlands along the bookshelves. The energy was soft, inclusive. No sharp glances, no guarded corners. Alma sat in the middle of the living room in a tiny white dress with embroidered blue flowers. She was holding a plastic spoon like a scepter, making royal declarations in a series of babbles and chirps. When she saw me, she squealed, Ayana. Everyone turned. I froze for a heartbeat. then smiled. "Hi, Alma." She reached for me, arms flailing. Maya laughed. She's been practicing all week. I picked her up, and she buried her face into my neck the way only small children do, completely unfiltered, completely surrendered. Lucinda approached, holding a small bowl of sliced strawberries. "She likes these better than cake," she said, offering me the bowl, then, softer. "I used to hate strawberries when I was little. Your mother loved them. She used to sneak them into my school bag." I glanced at her. You remember that Lucinda smiled faintly. She always packed two. One for her. One for me. Even when we weren't talking. I took the strawberries and placed a piece near Alma's mouth. She grabbed it with clumsy fingers and shoved it in triumphantly. "She's going to grow up knowing all of it," I said. "The good, the broken, the mended." Lucinda nodded. "She should." And then, out of nowhere, she added, "I'm glad it was you." I turned to her. Glad it was me who kept the record, who stayed. I don't think anyone else could have done it without bitterness. I didn't know what to say. So I said the only true thing I could. I was bitter. Just not forever. She placed a hand gently on Alma's back, then walked away. Later that afternoon, we gathered around the kitchen table to watch Alma smash her first cake. She didn't. She poked it like it had insulted her, then stared at us as if to say, "Now what?" Mateo took a video. Clara clapped. Someone handed me a phone and said, "Take a group photo." I hesitated. Then Maya took the phone from my hand and said, "No, you're in it." She pulled me into the frame, placed Alma in my arms, and leaned against my shoulder. "Smile," she said. "This one's going in her baby book." Click. It wasn't the scrapbook I made. It wasn't the family tree. But that photo. That was the proof of belonging we never had before. No signatures, no ceremony, just closeness. That night, long after everyone left, Maya called. "She's asleep," she whispered, completely knocked out, probably dreaming about spoons. I laughed. "She's a queen." "She is. And you're her keeper of memory." I paused. "Do you think she'll ever ask why I wasn't in the pictures from before?" Maya didn't hesitate. "I'll tell her the truth, that you were always there, just not always in the frame. But your fingerprints were on every page." I swallowed hard. "Thank you." "She's lucky. You know, most kids grow up with family who pretend. She'll grow up with one who remembers." After we hung up, I lit a candle and sat quietly on the couch. The house was still. Outside, the first buds of spring had started to bloom in the cold earth. A promise in waiting. I reached into my bookshelf drawer and pulled out another envelope. This one I hadn't written yet, but I knew what it would say. "Dear Alma, if one day you feel like you're not sure where you come from, open this. Inside, you'll find the names of those who came before you, and the silence they carried, and the noise they left behind. But more than that, you'll find the truth you were never alone. Even when you felt like a question mark, you were already someone's answer. Your name was always written, even when it was whispered, even when it was doubted, even when they forgot to look for it. I saw you before you saw yourself. Love. Ayana." I placed the envelope next to the first one, under the hummingbird blanket. Then I turned off the light. The next morning, I received a package in the mail. There was no return address. Inside was a small, flat box. When I opened it, I found a single silver pendant in the shape of a tree, tiny initials etched into its branches. All the initials of our family. Mine was at the base. No note. Just a quiet acknowledgement, mailed like a secret. I wore it to work the next day. No one commented. No one needed to. It sat against my chest like a weight I had finally earned the right to carry. Months passed. Spring stretched itself across the city in long golden streaks. I walked with Alma in the park on Saturdays, helped Maya reorganize her pantry on lazy Sundays, taught Clara how to digitize old VHS tapes. The archive kept growing slowly, without pressure. People began submitting their own stories to the website. Photos, letters, sketches of family trees with smudged names and a note. "Can you help me fill this in?" And I did. I helped all of them. Not because I wanted to fix their stories, but because I knew what it felt like to have no one believe yours. And now people believed. Not because I shouted, not because I demanded, but because I endured, because I stayed, because I remembered. The day the archive became permanent wasn't marked by a ribbon cutting or a grand speech. It happened in a quiet corner of the city library, in a small ceremony with barely 20 people, including me, Maya, Mateo, Lucinda, and a few staff from the preservation office. They had selected a shelf, just one, tucked between the oral history collection and a dusty row of local newspapers to house the Torres family archive. The glass case wasn't large, but it was real. Inside sat our tree, printed in high resolution and laminated against time. A selection of letters, each one carefully transcribed in both Spanish and English. Photographs from the 1940s through the 1990s, black and white giving way to color, then to clarity. A plaque listed the contributors, and at the very bottom, curated by Eliana Torres, granddaughter of Alma. I stood in front of it, staring through the glass. The scent of old books mingled with fresh polish. Overhead, the lights flickered softly, dust drifting like slow rain. Mateo walked up beside me. "Feels good." "Huh." I nodded, though the word good didn't really cover it. It felt complete. Not like the end of a task, but the settling of a house after decades of wind. "I remember," he said, "when we were kids, someone asked if you were the helper or the cousin. I raised my eyebrows. I remember that. You didn't say anything. You just smiled and got us water." I laughed quietly. I didn't know how to answer. And now I'd say I'm both. And neither. I'm the one who remembered us when we forgot ourselves. Mateo grinned and gave my shoulder a quick squeeze before drifting away to greet one of the librarians. Maya arrived late, Alma asleep in a wrap against her chest. She walked softly, as though trying not to disturb the silence of the books or the gravity of the moment. I met her near the display and leaned in. "She's out like a stone," Maya whispered. "She cried the whole ride here, but she'll sleep through the next hour like it's a lullaby." Lucinda was already there, standing across the aisle. She held a small box in her hands, wrapped in fabric. She approached me slowly. "I wanted to give you this," she said. "I was waiting for the right time." She handed it over. I unfolded the fabric. Inside was a necklace, thin, gold. Simple. But the pendant was unmistakable. A small bird in flight, wings outstretched, delicately carved. "It was your mother's," Lucinda said. "She used to wear it when she didn't want to speak. She said it helped her remember how to be quiet and still be understood." I swallowed. I didn't even know she had this. She wore it under her clothes most days, like a secret she chose to keep close. I nodded, fingers closing around it. "I don't know if I deserve to be here," Lucinda added. "You're here," I replied. "That's what matters now." She looked at me, really looked, and for the first time, I didn't see defensiveness or guilt, just effort, just her. After the library closed for the day, a few of us gathered at a cafe nearby. Maya ordered tea and a muffin. Mateo insisted on churros for the table. Alma had woken up cranky, but quieted as soon as she got her hands on a wooden spoon someone handed her. Lucinda sat beside Maya, gently rocking Alma's foot with her hand. I sat across from them, sipping black coffee, watching the light from the window fall across the table. There was laughter. Not about anything specific, just the kind that drifts out when there's nothing left to guard. At one point, Mateo leaned across and said, "So what now? Eliana, the archive's done. Are you going to take a break?" I smiled. I think I'll keep collecting. Not just from us, from others. There are people out there who don't even know what they've lost until someone hands them a name. He nodded. You should call it something. I already did. He raised an eyebrow. The quiet inheritance. Maya paused mid-bite. That's perfect. Lucinda whispered it to herself, testing the sound. Then she looked up. Eliana, I'm proud of you. I blinked. She said it simply. No tremble, no expectation, just offered, like a small candle in a dark room. I set down my coffee. Thank you. That night, I walked home alone. I didn't need a ride. I wanted the space, the rhythm of the street beneath my feet, the feeling of the city exhaling. As I passed a bookstore, something caught my eye in the display window. A children's book, illustrated with soft watercolor trees, titled, Who Came Before Me Inside. A note on the cover read, For the ones who ask where they come from and end up finding who they are. I bought it without hesitation. Back at home, I placed the book on my shelf beside the archive, then lit a candle. The hummingbird pendant hung from the lamp beside my desk, turning slightly with the warm air. I opened Alma's stories again. The folder had grown. Now, there were 21 documents. I clicked on the most recent one and typed, There was once a girl who wasn't invited to the beginning, but stayed long enough to become the ending. Not by force, not by fight, by faith. Quiet, unshakable. She did not knock on the door. She built another, wide enough for everyone, and when the family came to ask, Can we enter? She smiled and said, You were never locked out. You just forgot where to look. I saved the file, closed my laptop, sat with the silence. Weeks passed. Alma took her first steps on a rainy Tuesday morning. Maya sent me a video. I cried, alone, in my kitchen. The kind of cry that's not grief or joy, but that strange middle space that just says, something real is happening, and you get to see it. That weekend, we met at the park. Alma ran toward me, arms wide. Eya na, she shouted. I crouched down and caught her. She smelled like soap and strawberries. Maya laughed. She thinks you invented books. I smiled. Maybe I did. We sat on the bench, Alma climbing over both of us, completely unaware of how miraculous her existence was. Someday she'll ask, Maya said, about why some names were missing from the old stories, about what it means to be remembered. And I'll tell her. I said, not everything, just enough to show her she's never alone. Maya nodded. She won't need to wonder, because you wrote her into the beginning. No, I corrected. She wrote me into the ending. We stayed there until the sun dipped low, Alma asleep again in Maya's arms, and I knew without ache, without doubt that the story was whole, not perfect, but whole. The last time I touched the family tree, it wasn't to add anything. It was just to feel the paper, the weight of it, the smoothness of its folds. The gold star next to my name had faded a little, no longer gleaming like it did the day Miguel handed it to me. But I didn't mind. Some things were supposed to age. I had pulled the document out not because anything had changed, but because nothing needed to. There it was, my mother's name, still firm at the center of her branch, my name directly beneath hers. And now, just below me, written in pencil on my own backup copy. A new name. Just like before, Alma Lucia Rivera. I hadn't written it in any official way. Not for record. Not for display. Just for me. A way to say I was here when the line grew. I bore witness. Maya had asked me a few days ago whether I wanted to be her godmother officially. She used the word casually, like it didn't carry centuries behind it. But I knew what she meant. You already are? She said when I hesitated. But if you want, we can make it formal. A small ceremony. Nothing religious. Just people. Just truth. I told her yes. We planned it for the middle of May, when the weather would be warm, and the garden behind Maya's house would be green enough to feel like something sacred. There were no invitations, no schedule, just a circle of people, some family, some chosen, and a table with pitchers of lemonade, plates of roasted vegetables, and a chocolate cake shaped like a tree. Lucinda brought candles. Mateo printed photographs of every family member, alive and past, and hung them from strings between the branches of the plum tree. Maya wore a long linen dress. Alma had a flower crown made of baby's breath and tiny violets. I wore the hummingbird pendant. Before we began, Maya stood at the center of the circle and spoke. I brought Alma into this world, she said, but Eliana is the one who brought her history with her. She turned to me. You've never asked to be honored, but today, we're not asking permission. We're naming you. There was a pause. Then she placed her hand on my shoulder. Eliana Torres, do you accept this place not as a title, but as a promise? My throat tightened. I could barely speak. But I managed, I do. Lucinda stepped forward next. She held something in her hands, a folded square of cloth. This belonged to our mother, she said. We never knew what to do with it. It was always just there, but maybe it was waiting. She opened the cloth. It was an embroidered handkerchief, faded, soft, covered in tiny stitched initials. I recognized one. 8. Alma Torres. My great-grandmother. Lucinda placed it in my hands. It's yours now. There were no grand speeches, no performances, just a shared breath among those who had once been fragmented, and now somehow woven again. Later, as we all sat on blankets beneath the trees, Alma climbed into my lap and fell asleep, her head resting against my chest. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just listened to the birds, the laughter, the air, everything that came before, and still lived quietly inside us. That evening, I wrote her another letter. Dear Alma, today we planted your name beside the ones who came before. You won't remember it, but I will. I'll remember how you fell asleep before the candles were lit, how you snuck a piece of chocolate cake when no one was looking, how you clung to me like you'd known me for 1,000 years. You're not an heir to anything perfect, just something honest. A family that hurt, healed, and chose to stay. You are written in ink now, not because of blood, because of love. When you grow up, you might find names missing, gaps. But let that remind you that you have the power to fill them not with stories that feel forced, but with the ones that feel true. Build your tree however you want. Just promise me you'll leave enough room for forgiveness. Love. Ayana. I folded it and placed it in the growing stack in the drawer. Alma's archive. Already a collection. Already a future. A few months later, I was invited to speak again, this time at a national storytelling summit. I almost said no. It felt too far, too big, too public. But Maya told me, you don't speak to be seen. You speak so others remember themselves. So I went. I wore a soft gray dress and the pendant. No notes, no script. Just a deep breath and the story I'd lived. I told them about the baby shower, about Lucinda's words, about the letter from my grandfather, about the photograph of my mother laughing with her sister in the garden. I told them I wasn't trying to fix anything. I just wanted to understand the silence. I said, and in understanding it, I found everything we had lost. Afterward, a woman approached me, elderly, with trembling hands and a thick braid down her back. I lost my daughter in the war, she said, but I have her notebooks. I haven't been brave enough to read them. Until now, I didn't touch her. I just nodded. Sometimes, presence is the only offering. The archive continued to grow not just with my family's stories, but with hundreds of others. People from across the country sent in letters, recipes, snippets of old journals. I built a team of volunteers to help scan, translate, transcribe. We called it the Quiet Inheritance Project. We didn't advertise it. People found it when they needed it. Like a whisper passed down. Maya helped when she could. Alma grew like wildfire, climbing, talking, asking questions. At 2 years old, she told me her dreams. At 3, she asked why her name was so soft. Because you were named after the part of the story where people finally began listening, I said. She smiled. I like that part. So did I. Years later, when Alma was 12, she gave me a box. I made you something, she said. For everything you gave me, inside were drawings, a journal, clippings from the family archive, a letter. Dear Ayana, I don't remember a time before you, but Mommy says there was. I don't believe her. You were always there. You were my first book, my first story, my first silence that felt like love instead of loneliness. When I grow up, I want to be like you. I want to find the forgotten things and make them shine. I want to sit with the people who feel invisible and show them their own names. I want to build a bigger table. Love. Alma. I closed the box and held it to my chest. I didn't need anything else. Now, years later still, I sit by my window, watching a new child, Alma's daughter, run through the garden I once stood in. Arms flailing, laughter wild. I am older now. My hair is silvering. My hands are slower. But the archive still lives. So does the tree. So does the silence. And so do I. Not a footnote. Not a question. Not a name crossed out. I am the story's witness. I am the keeper of the names. I am the proof that memory, once held with care, becomes legacy.